Good afternoon. We had fruitful and useful talks with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Turkish Republic, Hakan Fidan. We have known each other for a long time, since the time when my Turkish comrade headed the National Intelligence Organization of Turkey. Our contacts are on a regular basis and always allow us to discuss issues that are important for the advancement of our bilateral agenda and our cooperation on regional and global issues. In April, we met at the Antalya Diplomatic Forum, which has become a very popular authority for world politicians and political scientists. And before that, in February, we met during my visit to Ankara. We often communicate by phone, so we are in regular contact. This helps to implement the agenda that our presidents defined during their communication. Today, we confirmed our mutual interest in strengthening the Russian-Turkish partnership, our general willingness to work on the expansion of the areas of cooperation and solving the issues that inevitably arise in relations between countries such as Russia and Turkey, especially when the West is trying to artificially introduce illegitimate complications in these relations. And yesterday, President Putin, at a meeting in the Kremlin with Mr. Fidan, very clearly confirmed our determination to promote a positive agenda, to promote projects of practical cooperation, and they are very large-scale, despite our attempts to make it difficult for Russia and Turkey to develop such cooperation. We have a solid historical foundation. We talked about this yesterday. On May 25th, 33 years have passed since the signing of the Treaty of Fundamental Relations between the Russian Federation and Turkey. And very soon, on June 3rd, we will celebrate 105 years since the establishment of diplomatic relations between Soviet Russia and Turkey, Kemal Ataturk. Today we discussed the prospects of strengthening cooperation in various areas of bilateral cooperation. As I have already said, we paid special attention to the implementation of the agreements at the highest level. And here, we welcome the dynamic development of cooperation in the energy sphere. The construction of the Akuyu nuclear power plant continues. This project is carried out by the Rosatom Corporation. We also talked about the operation and security of gas pipelines, the Turkish Stream and the Blue Stream, which, in the context of constant provocations and threats from the Kiev regime, marked the steady growth of the product, a turnover that exceeded $52 billion last year. And, of course, we will promote other areas of practical cooperation, diversify our material ties. Another 19th meeting of the Joint Commission on Trade and Economic Cooperation is being prepared. It will take place in Moscow at the end of June. And we have agreed that our ministries will be in close contact with the relevant agencies, economic, trade, and financial, to support the success of this important event. Russian citizens love to relax in Turkey. The number of tourists from our country was a record among all other countries, as I understand it, last year. And we welcome such a mood. And in this regard, of course, we pay great attention to ensuring the safety of our citizens at Turkish resorts, especially since the tourist season is now beginning. We are ready to build cooperation on the line of our Ministry of Emergency Situations, Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry of Turkey. These are issues that are related to the need to cooperate in extinguishing and preventing forest fires and other natural disasters. On international affairs, we have confirmed our approaches, which in general refer to the purposefulness and necessity of close dialogue on the air. We have emphasized on both sides the commitment to respect for state sovereignty, political unity, and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic. And we stress the importance of providing the Syrian authorities with support in overcoming the serious challenges they face in the transition period. Russia and Turkey are interested in building cooperation in other areas of the Middle East and North Africa, including Libya, where the situation is escalating again. We have agreed to use the influence of the Libyan side in order to prevent a new escalation that threatens to lead to a resumption of hostilities. Russia and Turkey share a common position on the Palestinian problem. We consider unacceptable what is happening in Gaza and on the western bank of the Jordan River. The prospects of creating a Palestinian state, as the UN suggests, are being deliberately destroyed through the creation of so-called facts on the ground. A huge number of civilians have already died or suffered, and this number is growing. Therefore, we will use all our influence in relations with the countries of the region and the UN to find ways to stop this violence, to return to the agreements that were reached and, it seemed, could provide a reliable ceasefire, but were later violated. Russia, in turn, will closely cooperate with the League of Arab States and the Islamic Cooperation Organization, which is now chaired by Turkey, in order to use our common authority, our common opportunities, to stop this devastation without exaggeration. In the South Caucasus, we have experience of cooperation in the 3+3 format. 3 countries of the region, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and 3 big neighbors of this trio, Russia, Turkey, and Iran. This format has already proven its effectiveness, and we will continue it. And of course, as yesterday, we spoke to President Putin about the situation in Ukraine, primarily in the context of the direct Russian-Ukrainian negotiations that took place in Istanbul on May 16th, and which were initiated after President Putin and President Trump's talks, and supported by President Erdogan and my colleagues. We are grateful for Turkey's readiness to continue to contribute to such negotiations, and in general, to peaceful settlement. Our position is well known. The President has repeatedly reiterated it during his recent speeches. I mean that the success of the negotiations will directly depend on whether we will be able to eliminate the main causes of the conflict, which are well known. I believe that we have had a very useful conversation. We will remain in touch, including on the issue of the safety of shipping in the Black Sea region, which we also talked about today. And Russia is interested in all the agreements that have been reached over the past 3 years being implemented on this issue. But, unfortunately, this cannot be said about our Ukrainian neighbors, to whom their Western patrons not only allow everything they want, but in every way undermine them. This is especially evident in the position of European countries. Our dialogue will continue, and I believe that the future of Russian-Turkish relations is good.
I would like to express what I heard in Moscow almost a year ago. Yesterday, we had very important meetings which were accepted by Mr. Putin. I conveyed my sincere greetings to Mr. Putin from our President's house. In addition, I also met with the head of the Russian delegation in Istanbul, Mr. Medinsky, and other Russian officials. I also met with some Turkish people who are active in Russia. I believe that my visit gave us an opportunity to deepen our multidimensional relations between Turkey and Russia. Today, we had the opportunity to discuss all aspects of our bilateral relations with my dear friend, the Russian team. Dear friends, our geography is changing very rapidly. In such a period, relations between Turkey and Russia play an increasingly important role in ensuring stability and security in our region. We can directly and sincerely discuss all the issues on our agenda. There is a strong relationship between our leaders, which has been built over the years with care and sincerity. This communication helps us to carry out our relations in a healthy and result-oriented manner. Today, we had very productive meetings with Mr. Lavrov. Trade, investment, energy, and tourism areas are also very important. Therefore, Mr. Lavrov's visits to our countries are of great significance. We are making every effort to build our bilateral relations as quickly as possible. We want to deepen our relations between our countries so that geopolitical challenges do not affect them. We will do everything we can to serve our dear members of the Russian Federation. In Moscow, I held a very important meeting. Mr. Putin sent a member of the Russian Federation to Istanbul to discuss the positive results of the negotiations. We are pleased with the results of the negotiations. We hope that the negotiations will continue in the coming weeks, and that there will be permanent peace between our countries. Mr. Erdogan has repeatedly said that Turkey is ready to support all possible negotiations. In addition, I would like to add that Turkey is ready to provide its support to the Black Sea Coast Guard. In this regard, we will remain in touch with our Russian friends. Dear friends, Mr. Lavrov and I have been discussing political and economic issues in Syria for the past 5 months. There have been many important developments in Syria. Despite the disinformation campaigns conducted by the Syrian government continues to support the international community. We see that the Syrian government's ability to fight terrorism and organized crime has been growing more and more recently. All military groups, a national army, and the Central Command are working together. We call on all parties concerned to take active part in the negotiations, and we hope that they will use their authority based on the agreement signed on March 10th. The sanctions against the United States and its allies are of great importance. Under the leadership of President Erdogan, we have been carrying out these efforts very carefully. I am very pleased that we have had the opportunity to discuss all these issues with Mr. Lavrov. As Turkey and Russia, we will continue to work together to protect the unity of Turkey and Russia. At the same time, we will do everything possible to ensure the well-being of the people of Syria. Mr. Lavrov and I have also discussed the gas sector, which is of great importance. It is a very important issue in the Middle East. The human tragedy of the genocide continues there. It is necessary to end this tragedy immediately. As we have always said, it is necessary to prevent this tragedy, this grief. Unfortunately, this genocide must be stopped. It is necessary to do everything possible to stop this bloodshed. We will continue to work on this issue together with Russia. I also had some questions about these issues in Africa. We exchanged views on these issues, especially on ensuring stability in Africa, which will serve the stability of the world. It is necessary to make a lot of efforts to restore all the tragedies in our region and around the world. Diplomacy exists for this purpose, and it is necessary to use all diplomatic tools. In addition, all the issues of common geography in the South Caucasus, we once again expressed our support for ensuring peace and stability. Azerbaijan continues to lead this process very wisely in the South Caucasus. Once again, I would like to express my gratitude to Mr. Lavrov and his colleagues for their warm welcome and hospitality. Thank you for your attention, friends.
Mr. Fidan, my first question is for you. Yesterday, in your meeting with Mr. Putin, you conveyed some messages to Mr. Putin and Mr. Erdogan. Which messages did you convey? And with what message are you returning to Ankara? And between Russia and Ukraine, they said that they were preparing a negotiation process. They said that they were preparing a project of some memorandums. Do you have such projects? And Mr. Lavrov, my next question is for you. First, Mr. Minister, please give us an answer.
A very important question. In our meeting with Mr. Putin, I conveyed to Mr. Putin some sensitive questions, and I conveyed them to Mr. Putin. This negotiation process between Russia and Ukraine continues, and we hope that this process will be successful. First, we discussed the Istanbul negotiation process. We discussed the course of this process, and we hope that the next negotiation process will provide a platform for the next negotiation process. And we are ready to do everything possible in this regard. I conveyed this message to you. On the other hand, in response to your question, decisions were made in Istanbul. And the second decision was about the creation of mutual conditions. The Russian side and Mr. Putin and Mr. Lavrov are preparing the conditions, or rather the text. On the other hand, Mr. Putin was asked about the construction of a nuclear power plant in Akuyu. We discussed the problems we are facing and how we can solve them. We met with Mr. Putin on these issues. And we witnessed how Mr. Putin was personally involved in the development of this construction site. On the other hand, the supply of Russian gas. We supply a large amount of Russian gas to our country. Continuous supply of this gas is of great importance to us.
It was a very productive meeting. There are reports that the American side wants to change its position on the Medvedevsky Agreement. There are also rumors that there could be an exchange of positions between Russia and the United States. Is this possible? Will there be such an exchange in the next few days? And will Turkey play a role in this?
As far as I understand, you are interested in the situation with the strikes on Russian territory, which the Ukrainian side carried out during the announced truce on Easter, and the 83rd victory in the Great Patriotic War. And before that, the truce that was announced in the context and in the form of a moratorium on strikes on energy facilities. This was the initiative of President Trump, which was put forward as a result of a telephone conversation with our president. We supported it. For a month, we resisted strikes on energy facilities. All this time, in all periods, no matter what they were called, ceasefire, moratorium, truce, the Ukrainian regime continued to strike on energy and any other civil infrastructure, on residential buildings, shops, kindergartens, schools, and on civilians in general, among whom there were and continue to be victims, killed and wounded. And the fact that the Western elite, including the United States, but above all in Europe, did not notice this at all, this is obvious to everyone. Those who are supposed to report to the leaders about what is happening around the Ukrainian crisis, especially since these leaders in Europe, in particular, consider this crisis to be their main problem and demand that Russia undergo a strategic defeat at any cost. And the fact that they are not reported the truth means that either they do not want to know this truth or they are hiding it from them. But I am convinced that those who speak most hysterically of the Russophobic positions, those who are trying to bring the United States, the current administration of the United States, to the Biden's position, to the position of the path of war, they perfectly understand what is happening. Therefore, our retaliatory blows, which you mentioned, are absolutely natural in this situation. The criminal must be punished, and I dare to assure you that Zelensky and his junta know perfectly well what they have been punished for. just as they know perfectly well that, unlike their blows, ours were inflicted exclusively on military objects and on objects that are used by the armed forces of Ukraine. As for the rumors about the fact that the United States wants to change the Russian negotiator, we, the United States, unlike the times of Biden, which fell in the summer, communicate normally. And if the United States wanted to convey something to us, they know how to do it, without going down to the humiliating form of spreading rumors. And as for the head of the Russian negotiating team, Mr. Medinsky, he is appointed, if anyone else doubts, by the President of the Russian Federation, Putin, and not by the head or representative of any other state. Yes, our presidents agreed during the last telephone conversation to prepare an exchange of prisoners between the United States and Russia. Details, for obvious reasons, are agreed upon by the relevant competent bodies.
Taking into account the irreconcilable position of the European Union on the Ukrainian crisis, do you allow Brussels to violate the resumed negotiation process between Russia and Ukraine? And the second question, when and where can the second round of Russian-Ukrainian negotiations take place?
You will ask the question later. It will be so that it is perceived correctly. I do not allow Brussels to violate the resumed negotiation process. I see these attempts, as does any objective observer. There are completely unprecedented actions, statements, appeals, and the most important thing, of course, is such confusion, nervousness, because they understand that they themselves, the European hawks, which are headed by France, Britain, Germany, and Poland, that they themselves do not have enough strength to continue this war. And they are very afraid, just to the point of death, that the United States will wave its hand at them and say, "You made this mess together with Biden. You should overcome it." President Trump has already stated that this is not his war. And he is interested in the fact that the negotiations between Russia and Ukraine continue. This was, in general, their joint initiative with President Putin. And these people, whom we mentioned today, of course, are trying to prevent this. Because if the war suddenly ends, they will disgracefully end their political careers. And they put their cheap egoistic interests above the interests of their peoples, demanding that they suffer, pay 3 or 4 times more for energy, for goods, so that they can accept the regime that the EU countries generously provide for Ukrainian goods. They have accepted many things, including outright lies and scams during the elections in those countries, where people can come to power, and not relatives and supporters of those who now lead the so-called United Europe, including Brussels, where the European Commission performs its function, of course, in a specific way. The European Commission is a technical body that monitors and ensures the implementation of the decisions made by the member states. The European Commission has no right to impose something that has not been approved by the member states. And they are trying to do this with great indignation. As for the second round of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, if you ask me, I would again turn to our Turkish friends in Istanbul. Very well.
Mr. Fidan, I have a question for you. Is Turkey ready to continue negotiating with representatives of Moscow and Kiev? Thank you.
We are always ready to provide a platform. We have always said this. We believe that this is our duty to ensure peace on the planet. Our president, Mr. Erdogan, from the very beginning of the war, has made a very strong appeal to the world community. Because we live in the same region, in the same pool, so to speak. In this regard, it is necessary to resolve the issues when both sides are satisfied. And in this regard, we will continue to provide all possible support.
Mr. Minister, the differences in the statements of the U.S. President, the changes in his statements, what do they mean to you? How do you perceive Mr. Putin's sometimes harsh, sometimes soft use of those statements? Could this be a strategic purpose behind this approach? And secondly, could this be a special measure against Germany? Thank you.
As for the changes in the statements of President Trump, we perceive it as changes in the statements of President Trump. Many world leaders have changes in rhetoric. For example, until recently, the whole of Europe was shouting in one voice, "No ceasefire, pumping Ukraine with weapons. This is what needs to be done, and finish Russia on the battlefield." What are they shouting now? Immediately cease fire without preconditions. At the same time, Macron adds, "But we will not stop supplying weapons to Ukraine during the period of ceasefire that we demand from Russia." Here is all the rhetoric. President Trump is a man who wants results. And when he sees how his efforts to promote and regulate how they agreed with President Putin, including the meeting in Istanbul, including the agreement on the exchange of memorandums between Russia and Ukraine, memorandums that will include not just a voiceless demand as a cover for the continuation of aggressive anti-Russian policy, but specific components of solving the problem with a view to eliminating its primary causes. And when he sees that his efforts, a group of European representatives, begin to sabotage, pushing Ukraine into completely reckless actions, including the attack of drones on Moscow and other Russian cities, and the attack on the helicopter of the President of the Russian Federation, of course, he may have certain emotions, and of course, as a person who does not like obstacles on the way to achieving noble goals, he has certain assessments, certain rhetoric. The main thing here is not to pay attention to rhetoric, but to ensure that Europe stops sabotaging the movement towards peace, which is supported by the United States and Turkey and which is completely attached to the Russian Federation. As President Putin said yesterday to Mr. Fidan, stating that we are ready, as soon as the exchange of memorandums takes place, to resume the negotiation process with the Ukrainian delegation. And the second question you had was about the removal of restrictions in Germany. You know, This statement by Mr. Merz only further emphasizes the level of competence of the people who have now broken through to power in Europe. And yesterday, he said with such pathos that from now on there are no restrictions on the range of strikes, and he spoke for himself, for France, for Britain, for the United States. A few minutes later, or an hour later, the vice-chancellor of this Mr. Merz said that there was no such thing at all. The same thing was said, as I understand it, in Bundeswehr, by the representatives of the Bundeswehr. And then Mr. Merz, apparently having figured out what he said, stated that he meant not a new decision, but a decision that had been adopted by the previous administration in Berlin, which once again makes us think about the fact that the decision to allow Ukraine to do whatever it wants, at least to some extent, but in relation to striking targets on Russian territory, it had been adopted a long time ago. It was kept secret. Therefore, when there is such a Minister of Foreign Affairs in France, Mr. Barrot, I think his name is, when he here yesterday, in my opinion, at the press conference, stated with French pathos that France is not fighting against the Russian people and against Russia, and that France supports the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Ukraine and its armed forces, he said so. He is not telling the truth. France is fighting against Russia because its long-range missiles are used by the Nazi regime in Kiev to strike on the territory of the Russian Federation, and mostly these are strikes on civilian objects. Therefore, for a Frenchman, if he loves his homeland and believes that it is of interest to him, he should be guided by the old motto of all French freedom-loving politicians and people in general, the freedom of brotherhood, which includes the rights of a person about whom France speaks at every corner, about any situation anywhere in the world, with the exception of the Ukrainian conflict. France does not say that in addition to sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity, there is also the right of a person, and Ukraine is the only country where the Russian language is legally prohibited in all spheres of its application. There is no such thing anymore, not in any part of the world, not in any state, only in Ukraine. And when the Commissioner for the Expansion of the European Union, Mrs. Koss, said the day before yesterday that Ukraine had completed its homework and was ready to launch negotiations on its entry into the European Union, she basically admits that the homework included the legislative abolition of the Russian language before these Nazis were allowed at the table of negotiations with the European Union. This is what we note. Sorry that I went a little beyond the scope of your question, but everything is interconnected here. And the main interconnection is that Europe has once again found a Nazi flag in order to once again embark on a completely deadlocked, failed adventure to defeat Russia strategically. And to hear from the mouth of the current leader of Germany that Germany will return to the position of the leading military force in Europe. Well, you know, when we just celebrated the 80th anniversary of the defeat of Hitler's Nazism, this is quite symptomatic. That is, history probably does not teach these people anything.
Hello, Mr. President. The first question is for the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry. Mr. President, how will the removal of U.S. sanctions from Syria affect Russian-Syrian relations? And how closely is our country now communicating with the new Syrian authorities? Russian Syrian? Yes, Russian-Syrian relations.
Well, sanctions against Syria have always been a step that we condemned and demanded to be stopped. Because although it was formally announced that the sanctions were being imposed against the regime of Bashar al-Assad, in fact, they directly, very painfully, hit all layers of the Syrian society, the Syrian people. And when, in December of last year, the authorities in Syria fell into the hands of the administration of the president of the transition period, we, together with the majority of Arab and Islamic countries, stood up for the cancellation of these sanctions. Just as we stand up for the return of the arrested money, for example, of the Afghan people. And the fact that President Trump realized the need for such a step, we welcome. Because no one else but the Syrian people suffered. Well, Europe too, in its noble ideas, when it saw that America had canceled the sanctions, it also seemed to follow this path. Well, better late than never. And we are cooperating with the new authorities in Syria. The president spoke to Mr. Shara on the phone. In March, following the telephone conversation, he sent him a message about how we see the setting up of our trade, economic and other relations in new conditions. In January, our delegation visited Damascus and had talks with President Shara. On the kind offer of my friend Hakan Fidan in Istanbul, in April this year, we met with his participation, with the Foreign Minister of Syria, Shabani. He has an invitation to visit Russia. We come from the fact that it is very important to participate in efforts to support the current authorities in order not to allow another explosion of the conflict, and not to allow the collapse of the Syrian Arab Republic.